In the spring of 1944, the air war over Europe had entered a decisive phase. American daylight bombing raids struck German industry with increasing regularity, escorted by long-range fighters like the P-51 Mustang and the P-47 Thunderbolt. The Luftwaffe, once dominant, was being ground down by attrition and fuel shortages. Yet within its laboratories and airfields lay a weapon that seemed to promise reversal: the Messerschmitt Me-262, the first operational jet fighter in history. The Me-262 was not merely faster than its opponents. It existed in a different technological era. Powered by two Junkers UMO-004 turbojets, it could exceed 540 miles per hour, far beyond the reach of piston engine interceptors. Its sleek, swept wings and concentrated cannon armament gave it unprecedented striking power against heavy bombers. For the first time since 1942, the Luftwaffe possessed an aircraft that could outrun, outclimb, and outdive the Allied fighters that dominated the skies. But technology alone could not erase strategic collapse. By the time the Me-262 entered combat, Germany's infrastructure was crumbling. Airfields were bombed daily. Fuel production had been reduced by more than half. The jet's engines required high-grade kerosene, refined from synthetic plants that were now prime targets for American B-17. Each sortie consumed fuel that no system could replace. Its introduction reflected both desperation and innovation. The German Air Ministry had envisioned the Me-262 as a defensive interceptor, yet political interference delayed its deployment. Hitler's insistence that it be used as a fighter bomber diverted resources and training for months. By the time operational jet units formed in late summer 1944, Allied bombers already struck deep into Germany with near impunity. When the Me-262 finally appeared, it shocked Allied airmen. American bomber crews reported silver arrows diving through their formations at impossible speeds, firing rapid bursts before vanishing. Gunners could rarely track them. P-51 pilots who tried to pursue found themselves outpaced within seconds. The age of the jet had begun, but too late to change the outcome. Behind each appearance of the Me-262 stood a collapsing system struggling to adapt. The Luftwaffe's command structure, training pipeline, and fuel supply had all been designed for conventional aircraft. The jet exposed every weakness at once. Maintenance required hours for each minute of flight, and engines lasted only a few dozen hours before failing. Yet for those brief moments in the air, the Me-262 represented something no other aircraft of the war could match: the future arriving amid defeat. The Me-262 was the culmination of decades of theoretical research that had begun long before the war. German engineers like Hans von Ohain and Helmut Schelp had refined the concept of turbojet propulsion when the rest of the world still relied on propellers. The aircraft that resulted was a marvel of design simplicity and aerodynamic efficiency, yet it carried within it the contradictions of a nation collapsing under its own ambitions. Each of the two JUMO-004 engines generated around 1,980 pounds of thrust, enough to propel the Me-262 nearly 200 miles per hour faster than the P-51 Mustang. Its armament, 430mm Mk-108 cannons, could shred a B-17 in a single pass. Tests showed that a few concentrated bursts were sufficient to destroy even the heaviest bombers. But such firepower came at a cost. The heavy recoil of the cannons, combined with the delicate nature of early jet engines, made the aircraft difficult to control during firing runs. Pilots required careful throttle management. Rapid acceleration could cause compressor stalls or engine flameouts. The Luftwaffe faced another obstacle: training. Jet flight demanded a completely different approach. Thrust response was delayed, landings were fast and unstable, and the engines overheated easily. Many of Germany's best pilots were already dead or grounded from injury. Replacements, trained in a matter of weeks, transitioned from piston engines directly into jets with minimal experience. The result was a weapon ahead of its operators, a machine whose potential exceeded the skill and resources of those who used it. Still, its psychological effect was immense. Allied bomber crews, accustomed to lumbering attacks from Bf-109S and FW-190S, suddenly encountered aircraft that streaked through their formations before defensive fire could even begin. Reports described attacks lasting seconds, fast, precise, and terrifying. The Me-262's approach created confusion in defensive coordination, forcing American formations to alter spacing and timing just to respond. To the Allies, this aircraft represented both fear and fascination. Engineers and intelligence officers sought fragments of wreckage from downed jets to study their engines. For the first time, the possibility of a post-war arms race in aviation technology seemed real. The jet had rewritten the limits of air combat. Yet to the Luftwaffe's own command, the Me-262 was a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. It required fuel that no longer existed, runways that could not be protected, and pilots who could not be replaced. It was the perfect weapon for a war that Germany could no longer sustain. The Me-262 first entered combat in the late summer of 1944 under the command of Jagdgeschwader 7, the world's first operational jet fighter wing. Its missions were clear: intercept American bomber streams before they reached German industrial regions. Yet these early encounters revealed both the aircraft's brilliance and the limits of its context. American formations of B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators flew in dense boxes, covered by hundreds of escort fighters. The Me-262, with its high speed, could slice through these formations in seconds, unleashing devastating bursts from its 430-millimeter cannons. Several bombers were often destroyed before their crews even realized they were under attack. Bomber gunners described the jets as silver flashes that appeared and vanished faster than their guns could traverse. But the Luftwaffe's tactical problem was time. Each Me-262 sortie required long, vulnerable minutes of takeoff and climb. The jet's Jumo engines were weak at low altitudes, making acceleration slow and leaving the aircraft exposed. American pilots soon learned to patrol near known jet airfields and attack during these critical moments. P-51 Mustangs would dive on the Me-262S as they approached for landing, when the jet's speed advantage was neutralized. The result was a strange kind of aerial duel, the fastest aircraft in the world hunted by one of the most agile. The P-51s could not catch a jet in flight, but they could trap it near the ground. The Luftwaffe responded by surrounding its jet bases with flak batteries and deploying piston engine fighters as takeoff escorts, a complex defense that consumed resources Germany no longer had. The first large-scale encounter occurred over Leipzig in early October 1944, when Me-262s intercepted a formation of more than 1,000 American bombers. The attack was tactically successful. Several bombers were destroyed in minutes, but strategically irrelevant. The Americans reached their targets, and the bombers continued to fly the next day. Each Me-262 loss, however, was catastrophic. Every aircraft required weeks of assembly, and every pilot killed represented months of irreplaceable training. For the men flying them, the jets offered a fleeting sense of power amid collapse. Veterans who had survived years of air war spoke of the shock of speed, the sensation of outrunning the sky itself. Yet even they knew that the Me-262 could not reverse the tide. It was a weapon designed for skies Germany no longer controlled. Each engagement between American bombers and the Me-262 carried symbolic weight. It was not merely a clash of aircraft, but of eras. The piston engine meeting the jet turbine, the industrial past colliding with the technological future. The outcome was no longer in doubt, but the spectacle of transition was unmistakable. By late 1944, the American 8th Air Force had adapted to the presence of jets. Intelligence briefings warned bomber crews to expect high-speed attacks from the rear or above, lasting only seconds. Gunners were instructed to fire preemptively at distant glints in the sky, hoping to disrupt the Me-262's approach. Escort fighters altered tactics as well. P-51 squadrons began orbiting jet bases in pairs, one group at altitude to intercept, the other near the ground to catch jets during landing. The Allies recognized that the jet's greatest vulnerability was not in flight but in its logistics. The Me-262 demanded long concrete runways and a constant flow of high-quality fuel. These were rare in late 1944 Germany. The U.S. Army Air Forces began systematically targeting airfields known to host jet units, cratering runways and bombing fuel depots. Without maintenance facilities, many Me-262s were destroyed on the ground before ever flying a mission. Even so, the aircraft remained a psychological weapon. Each report of a jet attack circulated through American bomber units, amplifying its mystique. The fear it inspired often exceeded the actual threat. Statistically, the Me-262 destroyed far fewer bombers than conventional fighters, yet every appearance disrupted formation discipline. Crews became tense and unpredictable, sometimes breaking formation to evade a threat that no one could actually see. Inside the Luftwaffe, the jet's introduction caused logistical chaos. Each sortie required multiple hours of inspection. Mechanics cannibalized parts from wrecked aircraft to keep a few operational. Engine lifespan averaged only 25 hours before failure. Many jets exploded on takeoff due to compressor surges or turbine blade fatigue. Despite these flaws, the Me-262 represented a glimpse of what air warfare would soon become, an age defined by speed, energy, and altitude rather than maneuver. The Luftwaffe attempted to exploit this through new tactics. Instead of one-on-one dogfights, Me-262s operated in groups of 4 to 8, executing high-speed passes against bomber formations, then retreating to rearm. This boom and zoom method minimized exposure and used the jet's speed as both offense and defense. It worked well in isolated encounters, but coordination at those velocities proved difficult. Pilots often lost visual contact with their wingmen, and radio systems were unreliable at high speed. To the Americans, the appearance of jets confirmed that Germany still held pockets of technological brilliance. Allied command ordered captured parts to be sent to England and the United States for study. Engineers quickly recognized the future implications. Within a year, every major power would begin jet development programs based on this blueprint. By the close of 1944, the Me-262 had changed the rhythm of the air war. It had not shifted victory or defeat, but it had altered perception. The skies over Europe were no longer the exclusive domain of propeller-driven flight. The next stage of warfare had announced itself in streaks of silver against a fading sky. The introduction of the Me-262 exposed a contradiction that defined late-war Germany: technological brilliance built on a crumbling foundation. The aircraft's design represented the peak of aeronautical science in 1944, yet every aspect of its operation, production, maintenance, logistics, was unsustainable. The jet was a machine from the future, forced to fight within a system from the past. The Jumo 004 engines, though revolutionary, were fragile. They used alloys Germany could no longer produce in quantity. Shortages of heat-resistant metals forced manufacturers to rely on inferior substitutes that degraded quickly under high temperatures. Each engine might last only 10 to 15 hours of flight before needing replacement. Mechanics described constant repairs, cracked turbine blades, oil leaks, or combustor fires. Ground crews often worked through the night just to prepare a handful of jets for the next day. Fuel was another crisis. The Me-262 required refined kerosene from synthetic plants derived from coal. By late 1944, these plants were prime targets for Allied bombers. Each successful raid crippled the Luftwaffe's ability to keep its jets airborne. Some squadrons had aircraft, but no fuel to fly them. Others had fuel but no spare engines. The result was paralysis disguised as readiness. Training collapsed under similar strain. Jet flight required specialized instruction, but flight schools were under bombardment or evacuation. New pilots received minimal hours in trainers before moving directly to frontline jets. Many crashed during takeoff or landing. To conserve fuel, flight time was reduced to short circuits around the airfield, leaving pilots unprepared for combat conditions. Despite these failures, the Me-262 remained a symbol of defiance. Propaganda broadcasts hailed it as the revenge fighter, the weapon that would turn the tide. In reality, fewer than 300 ever flew combat missions. For every jet airborne, another sat grounded awaiting parts. Yet even these limited numbers forced the Allies to adapt. Their air strategy shifted from offensive raids to systematic destruction of airfields and supply chains, an approach that accelerated Germany's collapse. What the Me-262 revealed was not simply technical superiority, but the impossibility of sustaining innovation without stability. Germany could design miracles but could no longer fuel, train, or protect them. Each flight represented the burning of irreplaceable resources. To the American crews above, the jet appeared as a flash of power. To the engineers below, it was a monument to exhaustion. The Me-262 story was not one of failure. It was a demonstration that even at the edge of defeat, innovation could reach beyond its time, if only for moments measured in minutes of flight. In early 1945, the Luftwaffe attempted to consolidate its surviving Me-262 units into a coherent striking force. The plan, called Operation Bodenplatte, in internal memos, envisioned concentrated jet attacks against Allied bomber formations over Western Germany. The strategy relied on one assumption, that speed could compensate for dwindling numbers. The newly formed Jagdgeschwader 7, equipped almost entirely with Me-262s, represented the last coordinated effort of the Luftwaffe. It fielded about 60 aircraft at a time, though maintenance meant barely half could fly on any given day. When they did, their speed made them nearly untouchable. American escorts often reported seeing the jets only as distant flashes or contrails streaking upward through bomber formations. The Me-262's cannon fire was devastating. Each pass could destroy multiple bombers before defenses responded. In a single engagement, German jets downed a dozen heavy bombers in under 10 minutes. Yet for every successful sortie, several aircraft were lost during takeoff or landing. The Allies intensified airfield attacks, leaving craters that destroyed fragile jet engines with flying debris. Tactically, the jets performed as promised. Strategically, they changed nothing. The Allies compensated for losses easily. Hundreds of bombers replaced those shot down, while Germany could scarcely replace one lost jet. The Luftwaffe's pilot corps, once the elite of Europe, had been reduced to a fraction of its former strength. Veterans were gone, and replacements lacked both training and coordination. The American response was pragmatic. Commanders ordered fighter sweeps over jet bases before and after every bombing raid. P-51s would orbit for hours, ready to strike jets as they climbed or descended. German crews adapted by using Schwalbe tactics, launching in pairs, climbing rapidly, and diving into clouds to evade pursuers. Even so, attrition eroded the force faster than it could be replenished. By March 1945, the Luftwaffe began using jets in storm attack missions, direct ground strikes on advancing Allied columns. Hitler's insistence on using the Me-262 as a bomber resurfaced, diverting precious aircraft from air defense. Pilots protested that this misuse wasted their advantage, but orders prevailed. Jet bombing sorties inflicted local damage, yet exposed aircraft to anti-aircraft fire they could not evade on takeoff or landing. The Me-262 had become a weapon searching for a purpose. It was too fast for traditional interception coordination, too fragile for prolonged combat, and too scarce to influence the war. Still, for Allied airmen who saw it, the jet left a lasting impression. Reports described the unsettling sight of aircraft that seemed to belong to another era, machines that looked and moved like the future while fighting for a regime that had no future at all. Each engagement was a paradox, the triumph of engineering meeting the certainty of defeat. By the spring of 1945, the U.S. 8th and 9th Air Forces had transformed the jet threat from mystery to manageable problem. Intelligence divisions had gathered detailed data from captured wrecks, pilot reports, and radar logs. They learned to anticipate Me-262 attacks not as random encounters, but as patterned events tied to geography, weather, and fuel supply. Allied radar networks began detecting high-speed contacts, leaving airfields near Munich, Regensburg, and Berlin. Commanders adjusted bomber routes to avoid concentration points and timed escort patrols around jet activity windows. Each Me-262 sortie now faced a gauntlet of patrols waiting before and after mission times. For the first time, the Allies treated jet defense as a system rather than an improvisation. At the same time, bomber formations adapted their geometry. Instead of tight, layered boxes, ideal for defending against slow fighters, they expanded spacing to reduce the effectiveness of jet cannon passes. This adjustment minimized clustered losses and gave gunners wider arcs of fire. Crews were briefed to aim not directly at jets, but ahead of them, predicting their trajectory like anti-aircraft fire. American P-51 units developed their own counter-tactics. They flew rat patrols, Low-level sweeps near airfields during the hours Me-262s were expected to land. The goal was not interception in flight, but ambush at vulnerability. Pilots reported shooting down jets on final approach, their engines roaring but unresponsive to throttle changes. These attacks forced the Luftwaffe to shift operations to dawn or dusk, further limiting sortie frequency. The Allies also began testing jets of their own. The British Gloucester Meteor entered limited service, intercepting V-1 missiles over England, while American engineers accelerated work on the P-80 Shooting Star. The message was clear. Germany's technological leap had not given it dominance, only a temporary lead. The psychological shift was equally important. By early 1945, American bomber crews no longer viewed the Me-262 as an invincible ghost, but as another target to be studied and countered. Air Force bulletins described standard procedures for jet interception, turning what had once been terror into routine. The jet's mystique evaporated as understanding grew. Still, Allied airmen respected what they faced. Reports from debriefings noted admiration for the German engineers, who had created a machine decades ahead of its time. The jet's design hinted at the next war, even as it failed in this one. By March's end, the balance of air power was no longer contested. The skies over Germany belonged to the Allies entirely. The Me-262, once hailed as a miracle weapon, was now hunted relic technology. Its brilliance preserved only in the memory of those who saw it streak through the clouds faster than anything built before. As the Allied armies advanced into Germany in April 1945, the jet age reached its tragic conclusion. Dozens of Me-262s lay abandoned on runways or hidden in forests, their sleek fuselages streaked with soot and mud. The Luftwaffe had run out of everything: fuel, parts, pilots, and most importantly, time. What had once been the symbol of technological supremacy now stood as evidence of how far innovation could outpace the world around it. Even in its final weeks, the Me-262 demonstrated what future warfare would become. In combat trials, Allied observers noted that traditional dogfighting had vanished. Engagements lasted seconds, governed by speed and energy rather than turning skill. Pilots who survived encounters described the sky as a place of mathematics. Angles, altitude, velocity, not instinct or heroism. The war had created the prototype for modern air combat, but in doing so, it had stripped flight of its romance. Inside Germany, engineers worked feverishly to refine the design. They proposed improved versions with stronger engines and radar-guided weapons. None would ever fly in combat. Bombing raids on factories at Augsburg, Regensburg, and Schweinfurt ended production just as it began. Each destroyed assembly hall represented years of lost research, and each lost engineer represented knowledge that could never be replaced. The Allies, meanwhile, raced to capture intact jets. American, British, and Soviet teams scoured airfields across Germany, loading Me-262s onto flat cars for shipment. Engineers dismantled the engines piece by piece, tracing how the Germans had achieved stable thrust at high temperatures. Within months, these captured blueprints would influence nearly every early post-war jet project, from the American F-86 Sabre to the Soviet MiG-15. Ironically, the Me-262's failure secured its legacy. It had proven the concept that speed and altitude, not numbers, would dominate future wars. Yet its story was a lesson in context. No weapon, however advanced, could compensate for systemic collapse. For the pilots who flew it, the Me-262 represented both pride and futility. They knew they commanded the fastest aircraft in the world, but each mission began with the awareness that it could not change the outcome of the war. Their victories were momentary, their losses permanent. The jet's roar echoed across the ruins of a country that could no longer hear it. By April's end, Allied air patrols encountered fewer and fewer jets. The last recorded Me-262 sortie occurred in early May, days before Germany's surrender. Its pilot, outnumbered and out of fuel, destroyed his own aircraft on the runway rather than let it fall into enemy hands. The jet that had once promised to change everything had done so, just not for the nation that created it. When the fighting ceased in May 1945, the Me-262 became the most coveted prize in Europe. Allied scientific teams moved almost as quickly as combat units, sweeping across captured airfields in search of jets, engines, and technical documents. The Americans called their effort Operation Lusty. The British had Operation Surgeon. The Soviets simply seized everything within their reach. The war for territory had ended, but a new war for knowledge had begun. Intact aircraft were discovered at Lechfeld, Munich, and Schleswig. American engineers carefully dismantled several Me-262s, shipping them to England and the United States for flight testing. The results astonished even experienced pilots. The jet was faster than any Allied aircraft by nearly 150 miles per hour, with acceleration so abrupt that test pilots described it as leaving the world behind. Yet the same flaws persisted: unreliable engines, poor low-speed handling, and limited endurance. For aviation scientists, these weaknesses were just as important as the strengths. The Me-262's problems revealed the boundaries of early jet technology, the metallurgy limits, compressor stability, and airflow control that future designers would need to solve. In laboratories from Dayton to Farnborough to Moscow, German research became the foundation for the next generation of flight. The influence spread quickly. The British Gloucester Meteor, American Lockheed P-80, and Soviet Yak-15 all incorporated lessons from captured German jets. The shape of modern air warfare, turbine propulsion, swept wings, pressurized cockpits, traced its lineage back to the wrecks scattered across Germany's airfields. In this way, the Me-262 achieved what it could not in battle. It reshaped the future. For the Germans who had built it, the post-war period was bittersweet. Many of the engineers and pilots were recruited under Operation Paperclip and similar programs, their expertise absorbed into Allied industries. The jet that had once been the spearhead of the Reich now powered the reconstruction of its enemies. The Me-262 also forced a re-evaluation of the air war itself. Historians and strategists realized that technological superiority could not offset logistical collapse or moral exhaustion. The jet's performance proved that innovation alone was not enough. It required organization, resources, and purpose. Among the ruins of airfields like Lechfeld and Erding, Allied soldiers found burned-out engines beside notebooks filled with calculations. These were the relics of an idea too advanced for its time, that the future could be built even as the present disintegrated. In that contradiction lay the Me-262's true legacy, not as a failed weapon, but as the bridge between eras, the first glimpse of the sky humanity was about to enter. In the years that followed, the Me-262 became a symbol of both genius and futility. A machine that had changed the world, yet arrived too late to save the nation that built it. For aviation historians, it marked the dividing line between the industrial age of flight and the technological age of speed. What the Wright brothers had begun, the jet engine completed, the transformation of air power into the defining weapon of the modern world. Every major post-war aircraft carried traces of its influence. The American F-86 Sabre, the British Meteor, and the Soviet MiG-15 each borrowed its core lessons. Swept wings for high-speed stability, engine placement to balance thrust and drag, and the use of heavy firepower in short, concentrated bursts. Within 5 years of the Me-262's debut, jet propulsion was no longer an experiment, but the global standard. For the pilots who faced it, the Me-262 remained unforgettable. American bomber crews remembered its attacks as surreal flashes of speed, moments when physics seemed to fail. P-51 veterans, despite victory, often spoke with admiration rather than contempt. They had glimpsed the future in motion, and for a few seconds they had chased it. Within Germany, the aircraft's myth persisted as part of a larger narrative of lost miracles. Technologies that might have changed the outcome if only they had come sooner. Yet this belief ignores the deeper truth revealed by the Me-262. Innovation cannot thrive in collapse. The jet's existence proved that progress divorced from stability is self-defeating. The system that created it was already dying, and the jet became its final expression, a triumph of intellect built on the ruins of a war machine. By the 1950s, surviving Me-262s rested in museums and hangars across the world. Engineers studied their airframes. Historians studied their meaning. The aircraft's shape, once terrifying, became iconic, sleek, minimalist, and unmistakably modern. Decades later, its influence could still be traced in every supersonic jet and stealth aircraft that followed. The Me-262 was never a decisive weapon. It did not alter campaigns, shift strategies, or save cities, yet its impact transcended victory or defeat. It compressed the future into the closing months of a dying war, showing humanity what was possible even as everything around it collapsed. In the end, the Me-262's story is not about Germany's lost opportunity, but about the moment when speed replaced maneuver and technology replaced courage as the measure of dominance in the sky. When American bombers met the Me-262, they encountered not just an enemy aircraft, but the threshold of a new world, a world that would define the rest of the century. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more World War II stories.